Pay attention to Jorge Torres Jr., 42 years old, spending what he thinks is just another Saturday night drinking wine with his girlfriend in their Winter Park, Florida apartment on February 23, 2020. He has less than 11 hours left to live because Sarah Boone, 42 years old, the woman he's been dating for 4 years, is about to turn a game into a death sentence. On this night, Jorge thought they were playing around, having fun, like they'd done dozens of times before. On this night, Sarah had revenge on her mind, and she would record every moment of it on her iPhone. This is the story of how a man's trust in his girlfriend became his death warrant, and how she filmed her own conviction. Jorge Torres Jr. was 42 years old, Hispanic, and weighed only 103 pounds at the time of his death. Think about that for a moment. A grown man weighing barely over 100 pounds. Sarah Boone, by contrast, was 5 feet 3 inches and weighed 140 pounds. This physical disparity would become crucial to understanding what happened. Sarah Boone, born October 10, 1977, lived with Jorge at 4748 France Lane in Winter Park, Florida. She had a son from a previous marriage to Brian Boone, who would later become a key witness. But beneath her ordinary surface, Sarah was consumed by anger, resentment, and a complete inability to take responsibility for her actions. The couple had been together for 4 years, and those years were marked by police calls, arrests, and mutual violence. Jorge had been arrested 4 times for battery against Sarah. Each time, she bailed him out. The cycle would repeat: fight, arrest, bail, reconciliation, fight again. But Sarah wasn't just a victim. She'd been arrested for battery by strangulation against Jorge in July 2018. This was a relationship defined by mutual combat, heavy drinking, and toxic cycles that neither could escape. Text messages from Sarah's phone revealed the depth of her rage. In May 2019, she told Jorge to off and get the out of my life. She called him a dumpster diver, mocked him for living with his parents at 41, told him he'd end up with no girlfriend and lonely. Yet in other messages, she begged him to be a man and take care of me. Push and pull, rejection and need, hatred and dependence. Both were heavy drinkers. Both contributed to the destruction. Friends described their apartment as a war zone, where evenings would start with wine and end in violence. Sarah would later claim Jorge had beat me bloody, threatened to make her unrecognizable to my son, and threatened her dogs. Some of these claims may have been true. Domestic violence is complex, and it's entirely possible Jorge did terrible things to Sarah. But even if all of that were true, what Sarah did on February 23, 2020 wasn't self-defense. It was calculated revenge, carried out over hours, documented on video, and covered up with lies. And on that February night, their toxic relationship reached its final, fatal conclusion. February 23, 2020, started like many other Saturdays. They were drinking wine at home. Around 4 p.m., neighbors saw them both at the apartment. Everything seemed normal. As evening progressed, the drinking continued. According to Sarah's later claims, they started playing hide-and-seek. She said Jorge suggested hiding in a blue suitcase as a joke. She said she zipped it partway shut and went upstairs to bed, accidentally falling asleep. She'd have you believe she simply forgot about him, that she woke up around 11 a.m. the next morning and discovered Jorge wasn't breathing. But Sarah Boone's iPhone told a very different story. At 11:12 p.m. on February 23rd, Sarah started recording. The videos, there were 2 of them, showed the blue suitcase lying on the floor, zipped completely shut. Inside, Jorge Torres Jr. was fighting for his life. The suitcase bulged as Jorge pushed desperately against the fabric. His 103-pound frame used every ounce of strength trying to break free. Then you hear his voice. "Sarah!" Muffled by fabric, but unmistakably panicked. "Sarah!" He was calling for help, calling for the woman he loved to let him out. But Sarah didn't let him out. Instead, she laughed. Not nervous laughter, real, genuine amusement at his suffering.
Sarah. 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 Stupid. Sarah. That's my name. The word up.
Then Jorge said the words that would haunt everyone who heard them. "I can't breathe. Seriously."
Sarah, I can't fucking breathe, babe. Seriously.
This was the moment where any reasonable person would stop, unzip the suitcase, and let their partner out. The moment where you recognize someone's life is in danger. Instead, Sarah responded, "For everything you've done to me, you, stupid."
Sarah, I can't fucking breathe, babe. Seriously. Yeah, that's when you do when you choke me, Sarah.
Jorge was suffocating, begging for air, and Sarah cursed at him, telling him he deserved this suffering as payback. The taunting continued. "Yeah, that's what you do when you choke me," she said, referencing past violence. "That's what I feel like when you cheat on me." This wasn't a game. This was punishment. Sarah playing judge, jury, and executioner for every grievance she'd stored up. A second video showed the suitcase had been moved and flipped. This proved Sarah was present and active while Jorge was still alive and struggling. Between the two videos, Jorge's movements grew weaker, his voice quieter, the fight draining out of him as oxygen depleted. The medical examiner later explained the horror Jorge experienced. As he consumed the limited oxygen inside the suitcase, carbon dioxide levels rose, triggering an overwhelming hunger for air. His respiratory rate increased, depleting the remaining oxygen even faster. It's a prolonged, agonizing death. The medical examiner estimated Jorge may have been trapped for up to 11 hours, but likely stopped breathing around 1 a.m., roughly 2 hours after that first video. After recording the second video, Sarah claims she went upstairs and fell asleep. Jorge Torres Jr. died alone, in the dark, trapped in a suitcase, betrayed by the woman he loved. The autopsy revealed multiple injuries: a black eye, lacerated lip, bruising on his forehead and head, abrasions on his back and hands from struggling against the fabric. Jorge wasn't passively trapped. He was fighting desperately to escape. The cause of death? Asphyxiation. The manner? Homicide. And Sarah Boone had recorded every moment of it on her iPhone, creating the most damning evidence against herself that prosecutors would ever need. At 1:00 p.m. on February 24th, Sarah called 911. But before that, she'd called someone else, her ex-husband, Brian Boone. She told him Jorge was dead. Brian told her exactly what anyone would say. "Call 911 right now." But Sarah didn't call immediately. More than 2 hours passed from when she claims to have found Jorge until she finally dialed 911. 2 hours. Time to clean. Time to think through her story. Time to decide how to explain this. When she finally made the call, her voice was calm. Too calm, investigators noted. She explained they'd been drinking wine, playing hide and seek, that Jorge climbed into a suitcase as a joke. She zipped it up partway. She went to bed. She accidentally fell asleep. She woke up around 11 a.m., remembered he was still in there, and found him dead. Orange County Fire Department arrived at 1:00 p.m. They confirmed Jorge was deceased inside the blue suitcase. At first, it seemed like a tragic accident, a drunken game gone horribly wrong. Then investigators searched Sarah's iPhone and found the 2 videos. Everything changed. The video showed this was no accident. Sarah had recorded Jorge's suffering, laughed at his pleas, taunted him while he begged for air, then left him to die. On February 24, 2020, detectives arrested Sarah Boone and charged her with second-degree murder. In Florida, second-degree murder requires proving a depraved mind regardless of human life. The videos provided direct evidence of that depraved mind. Her laughter, her taunts, her refusal to unzip the suitcase even when Jorge said he couldn't breathe. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was sustained cruelty over hours. Sarah was held without bond in Orange County Jail, where she would remain for nearly 5 years awaiting trial. Most murder cases go to trial within 18 to 24 months. Sarah's took more than twice that long. The delay wasn't due to court backlogs or COVID-19. The delay was caused by Sarah herself. From the moment she was arrested, Sarah began systematically sabotaging her own defense. She would cycle through 13 different attorneys. 13! Each one eventually asking to withdraw because representing her was impossible. But before we get to that legal circus, you need to understand what Sarah was like behind bars, because her behavior would shock even seasoned legal observers. While sitting in jail charged with murder, Sarah Boone had urgent concerns to share with the court. She was worried about her hair appointments. She needed better beauty products. She complained about jail conditions affecting her appearance. Yes, you read that right. Her boyfriend had died a horrific death, a death she caused and recorded, and she was filing complaints about hair care. This narcissism was just the beginning. Sarah produced hundreds of pages of handwritten letters to the court, including one 58-page manifesto in June 2024. In these letters, she quoted Cicero and legal dictionaries, lecturing Judge Michael Kranick on his constitutional duties. She accused him of black robe disease and being part of a conspiracy against her. She called herself a survivor, not a murderer, claiming she was being wrongly judged by a social media mafia. She described her ordeal as a crucible, a spiritual test designed to refine her character. She positioned herself as a martyr. What's conspicuously absent from hundreds of pages? Any genuine remorse for Jorge's death. Any acknowledgement that her actions ended a human life. But Sarah's biggest sabotage was her treatment of her attorneys. Her first lawyer, Mauricio Padilla, lasted 2 years, from 2020 to 2022. During that time, Sarah called him multiple times a day, berated him, questioned his competence, and demanded legal strategies he knew wouldn't work. He finally withdrew, citing an adversarial relationship so toxic he couldn't effectively represent her. Attorney number 2 didn't last nearly as long. Neither did 3, 4, or 5. By the time the case reached trial in 2024, Sarah had gone through 13 different attorneys. 13! It's an extraordinary number in Florida legal history. She called one attorney a dud, another a buffoon. Patricia Cashman described working with Sarah as a constant battle, noting her conduct was outrageous. These weren't bad lawyers, they were experienced professionals. The problem was Sarah. She believed she knew better than her attorneys. She refused legal advice. She demanded impossible strategies. And when attorneys explained why her ideas wouldn't work, she accused them of conspiracy. The pattern repeated over and over. New attorney, attempt at rapport. Sarah turns on them. Complaints filed, attorney withdraws. The delays mounted. Jorge's family watched in frustration as trial dates were pushed back year after year. Not because of legal complexity, but because Sarah couldn't get along with anyone. By 2024, Judge Kranick had had enough. In a rare ruling, he declared Sarah had forfeited her right to court-appointed counsel through systematic obstruction. She'd have to represent herself. For a brief period, she created a hand-drawn flyer trying to recruit a lawyer. Eventually, attorney James Owens agreed to take the case to trial. But the damage was done. Nearly 5 years had passed since Jorge's death, and Sarah's behavior had become almost as much of a story as the crime itself. The irony? Her obstruction probably hurt her case. By 2024, everyone knew about her letters, her 13 attorneys, her refusal to cooperate. That knowledge certainly didn't help when she took the stand claiming she was a frightened victim. After nearly 5 years of delays, Sarah Boone's trial finally began on October 14, 2024. The prosecution's case was straightforward. They had the videos. They had the autopsy. They had Sarah's inconsistent statements. Sarah had documented her own crime. Assistant State Attorney William J. argued that Sarah acted with malicious intent to punish Jorge, then went to sleep, leaving him to take his final breaths on this earth alone. The jury watched the videos. They heard Jorge's voice. "I can't fucking breathe. Seriously." They heard Sarah's laughter, her taunts. "For everything you've done to me, F you." The defense strategy was battered spouse syndrome. They argued Sarah had been trapped in an abusive relationship, that Jorge had beaten and terrorized her for years. They called psychologist Dr. Michael Brannon, who diagnosed Sarah with PTSD and anxiety. They called neighbor Pearl Walker, who testified about marks she'd seen on Sarah. And then Sarah took the stand, a high-risk move. She testified that she locked Jorge in the suitcase to feel safe. She recorded the videos so Jorge could understand what it felt like to be scared. She claimed she hit the suitcase with a bat because she was afraid he'd break out and hurt her. It was a sympathetic narrative, a woman pushed to her breaking point by years of abuse. But the prosecution's cross-examination was devastating. They played the videos again. They asked Sarah to explain her laughter, her taunts, her mockery. How does a woman afraid for her life laugh while her abuser suffocates? How does someone acting in self-defense go to bed while their attacker dies slowly? Sarah struggled to explain the disconnect. Her answers were evasive, contradictory. She claimed she didn't remember saying things the videos clearly captured. She insisted she was scared, even when the videos showed her in complete control. The prosecution argued the real Sarah wasn't the frightened victim on the stand. The real Sarah was the woman laughing on those videos. The woman who saw an opportunity for revenge and savored every moment. Florida law defines second-degree murder as an act evincing a depraved mind, regardless of human life. Sarah had provided perfect evidence of her depraved mind herself. She'd recorded it. On October 25th, 2024, after less than 2 hours of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. Less than 2 hours. For a case that took 5 years to reach trial, the jury needed less time than a movie to decide. Jorge's family wept openly. After 5 years, they finally had justice. On December 2nd, 2024, Sarah returned to court for sentencing. Jorge's family gave heartbreaking victim impact statements about the man they loved, the pain of watching the trial, the 5-year wait for justice. Judge Kranick addressed the depravity of the crime, the cruelty captured on video, Sarah's complete lack of remorse, and her obstruction of justice through attorney sabotage. The sentence: life in prison with no possibility of parole. In Florida, life means life. No parole, no early release. Sarah would die in prison. Within days of sentencing, Sarah wrote another 27-page letter. Defiant, angry. "I didn't lose," she wrote. "God just wanted me to win in a different way." She claimed excitement for her appeal to the Supreme Court. She used the metaphor of kintsukuroi, Japanese pottery repaired with gold, suggesting her conviction had healed her, made her better. Sarah Boone still didn't understand what she'd done. She was still the survivor, still the victim, still the one wronged. And Jorge Torres Jr., who died alone in a suitcase begging for mercy, was still somehow to blame.